In one room, a scientist sits in the glow of a sleep lab, wires tracing every flicker of her brain. Her body lies still, but inside the dream, she realizes she's dreaming. Across the world, in the stillness of a Himalayan monastery, a Tibetan monk rests in deep meditation. His breath is slow, his mind utterly silent. On the monitors, something extraordinary appears in both. A surge of electrical activity, gamma waves oscillating at 40 cycles per second, filling the brain like a sudden burst of light. Two human beings in two utterly different realities, yet the same neurological signature for waking up. It's not a metaphor, it's the same measurable pattern, whether the mind is gaining lucidity inside a dream or dissolving the illusion of self in meditation. This is where the boundary between sleeping and waking begins to blur. Because if the brain wakes up in the same way from a dream as it does from the dream of self, what does that say about the reality we're in right now? Scientists call it gamma band synchrony. Mystics call it awakening. And somewhere between those two languages lies a truth that neither can fully own. Perhaps these moments are not escapes from reality at all, but glimpses into its deeper structure. This exploration is not about answers carved in stone, it's about following the thread of evidence, from neuroscience to ancient practice, to see where it leads. It's about letting the question itself transform how we look at the world. If this kind of inquiry resonates with you, it's because you've already begun the journey, and there's much more waiting for you to uncover. So subscribe, and let's keep uncovering it together. When you drift into REM sleep, your brain shifts into a peculiar state. The body is paralyzed, sensory input from the outside world fades, and the cortex becomes a stage for a self-generated reality. Normally, in this state, the frontal regions, the parts involved in reflection, planning, and self-awareness, go quiet. This is why dreams feel real while they're happening. The system that could question them is offline. But in the rare moment of lucidity, something remarkable happens. Studies led by Ursula Voss have shown that in lucid REM, the frontal cortex, especially the dorsolateral prefrontal area, lights up again. It's as if the brain partially returns to a waking mode, reactivating the capacity to recognize itself as dreaming. And alongside that shift comes the sudden rise of gamma band activity, rapid electrical oscillations that link distant brain regions into a coherent, synchronized whole. A different kind of experiment was unfolding in a neuroscience lab at the University of Wisconsin. Long-term Tibetan meditators trained in open awareness and non-dual states were wired for EEG while entering deep meditation. Their brains, too, produced extraordinary surges of gamma synchrony far beyond baseline waking levels, sustained for minutes at a time. This was not the random flicker of a dreamer catching themselves mid-story. It was the deliberate stabilization of heightened panoramic awareness. In both cases, lucid dreaming and advanced meditation, the gamma activity seems to knit together perception, memory, and self-awareness into a unified field. The prefrontal cortex returns to the conversation, but it's working in harmony with regions like the temporoparietal junction, which maps our body in space, and the posterior cingulate, a hub of the default mode network that normally narrates our life from the inside. In these moments, that narration loosens its grip. Awareness isn't filtered through the usual lens of me and my story. This overlap is more than a curiosity. It suggests that what we call waking up might not depend on the external world at all. It's a neural event, a particular configuration of networks and rhythms that can happen whether the sensory data is coming from the outside, from memory, or from the dream factory of the sleeping brain. If two such different paths, one in the stillness of meditation, one in the flux of REM, can converge on the same neurological signature, it raises a daring possibility. The difference between waking reality and a dream might be thinner, more permeable than we've been taught to believe. A lucid dreamer develops a kind of reflex, the quiet habit of asking, "Am I awake right now?" At first, it's a conscious exercise. Stephen LaBerge, who pioneered modern lucid dreaming research, taught his students to perform reality tests during the day. Simple acts like trying to push a finger through the palm, glancing at a clock twice to see if the numbers hold steady, or reading a line of text and reading it again to see if it changes. In waking life, These checks always confirm the same thing. The world is solid, time is stable, objects stay where they are. But the repetition trains the mind to ask the question reflexively. And in the dream, where logic and physics bend, the same test can shatter the illusion instantly. In another tradition, far removed in culture and language, the Indian sage Ramana Maharshi taught a practice that sounds strikingly similar, though it points to something even more fundamental. Instead of testing the stability of clocks or walls, the student turns attention to the source of awareness itself, asking, "Who am I?" Not as a philosophical puzzle, but as a direct inquiry into the reality of the I that seems to be perceiving, thinking, and acting. This question, when followed with sincerity, reveals that the solid self we take for granted is no more substantial than the scenery of a dream. The parallel is striking. Both methods interrupt the automatic acceptance of a given reality. Lucid dreaming's reality tests expose the malleability of the dream world. Self-inquiry exposes the malleability of the waking self. In both, the practitioner learns to step outside the unquestioned frame and see that the frame itself is part of the illusion. This shift doesn't require exotic tools or altered states. It's a skill, cultivated by repetition, that can be brought into any moment. In a meeting, on a walk, in the middle of a conversation, you can pause and ask, "What is this really? Who is the one experiencing it?" The habit itself begins to dissolve the unquestioned solidity of events, just as dream tests dissolve the unquestioned solidity of dreams. Perhaps this is the most accessible form of awakening, not an extraordinary peak experience, but the steady practice of looking closely enough to catch the seams in what we assumed was seamless. Whether in the shifting landscapes of a REM sleep or the ordinary streets of our daily lives, the same simple act of questioning can open the door to lucidity. Beneath the constant stream of thoughts, emotions, and sensory impressions, there's a quieter rhythm, one the brain maintains without our conscious attention. Neuroscientists call part of it the default mode network, or DMN. It's active when we're daydreaming, remembering the past, imagining the future, or telling ourselves the story of who we are. In many ways, it is the narrator of our personal movie. But when people enter certain states, deep meditation, lucid dreams, even psychedelic experiences, that narrator begins to fall silent. Studies using brain imaging have shown a consistent pattern. The DMN's activity drops, its hubs in the medial prefrontal cortex and posterior cingulate cortex dimming like theater lights before a scene change. The effect is often accompanied by a peculiar subjective shift, the sense that I have stepped aside, leaving perception unfiltered by the usual self-referential commentary. Philosophers like Thomas Metzinger describe the self not as a thing, but as a transparent model, a kind of interface the brain constructs to organize experience. In everyday life, we look through this interface without realizing it's there, much as we forget we're looking through the glass of a window. But when the DMN quiets, that window becomes visible. We see that the self is an image, compelling, detailed, but ultimately just part of the display. In a lucid dream, this realization comes as a sudden jolt. The characters, the scenery, the plot itself are all mind-made. In waking life, during moments of profound stillness, the insight is subtler but no less radical. The one I thought I was is also part of the scenery. The body is moving, words are being spoken, sensations are appearing, but the solid center I imagined is nowhere to be found. This isn't the annihilation of the person, as the phrase ego death sometimes suggests. It's more like discovering that the protagonist of the story is also the storyteller, and that both roles are played by the same invisible hand. The loss is only of the illusion that the two were ever separate. When the self dissolves, what remains is not blankness, but clarity. Awareness no longer orbits a fixed point called me. It moves freely, seeing without needing to claim, listening without needing to defend. In that space, reality feels less like something happening to us and more like something unfolding as us. And if this is true, then waking from the self might be the most important awakening of all. Long before neuroscience could track the rhythms of the brain, certain traditions had already mapped the landscapes of consciousness with astonishing precision. In Tibetan Buddhism, the Bardo describes life, death, and dreaming as different passages through the same vast terrain. Each is called a bardo, an in-between, because none are as solid as they seem. Waking life is simply the bardo we know best. Within this framework lies the discipline of dream yoga, a practice that treats the dream state as a training ground for liberation. The aim is not merely to control dream content, but to recognize dreams as dreams while they're happening, and then carry that recognition into waking life. This continuity of awareness dissolves the sharp line we draw between real and imagined. Both are seen as projections of mind, equally transient, equally luminous. In dream yoga, practitioners rehearse the art of lucidity nightly, first by realizing they are dreaming, then by exploring the dream without fear or grasping, and finally by resting in the recognition that even this moment is mind-born. The skills transfer. A person trained to stay lucid in the shifting landscapes of sleep is better prepared to stay lucid when the landscapes of waking life shift, through crisis, loss, or even death itself. The Bardo teachings extend this lucidity into the after-death state, instructing the practitioner to recognize the brilliant lights and visions that arise as mind's own display. Fear and clinging dissolve when the forms are seen as insubstantial, like a rainbow or a reflection. Liberation, in this view, is simply the uninterrupted recognition of that truth. Seen from a modern perspective, this is a sophisticated spiritual technology. It is a cartography of states that most of us pass through unconsciously. The dream state becomes a laboratory, the waking state a classroom, and the bardo of death the final examination. The goal is the same across all three: to remain awake to the fact that every appearance is, in some sense, a dream. For centuries, these instructions have been preserved not as abstract philosophy, but as practical guidance, because when the illusion is recognized, whether in sleep or in the moment of dying, the one who sees it is already free. In physics, there is a principle that still unsettles even those who work with it daily. The outcome of a measurement depends on the act of measuring. At the quantum level, particles exist in a state of probability, waves of possibility, until an observation forces one outcome to emerge. Before the measurement, the electron is not here or there. It is only when the system is observed that it chooses a definite state. This is more than a technical curiosity. John Archibald Wheeler, one of the 20th century's most influential physicists, proposed a participatory universe. He imagined reality as something unfinished, in which observers are not passive witnesses but active participants. His famous delayed choice thought experiment suggested that choices made in the present could influence how events in the past are defined, as if the act of looking could reach backward in time. In the language of our metaphor, this makes us less like characters moving through a pre-written story and more like dreamers shaping the dream as it unfolds. The stage, the props, the dialogue, none of it fully exists until it is engaged with by awareness. Without that participation, reality remains in a suspended state of potential, like a dream waiting for its first scene. Some physicists see this as a deep clue that consciousness may be woven into the very fabric of the cosmos. Others argue for interpretations that keep the mind out of the equation entirely. But even in those models, the boundary between the observer and the observed becomes strangely porous. Information, interaction, and relationship sit at the core of what reality is. Philosophers like Bernardo Kastrup extend this idea further, suggesting that what we call matter is simply what experience looks like from the outside. In that view, the universe is not a vast machine producing consciousness, but a vast field of consciousness producing the appearance of a machine. This flips the common story on its head. The mind is not inside the universe. The universe is inside the mind. When seen this way, the parallels with dreaming grow sharper. A dream's landscapes seem to have independent existence, yet dissolve when the dreamer awakens. If the waking world shares the same underlying structure, then every moment we live is part of an ongoing act of co-creation between reality and the awareness that beholds it. In that sense, to be here at all is to be both the witness and the architect of the universe you inhabit. The question is not whether you are participating, but how consciously you choose to do it. The evidence doesn't prove that life is a dream, but it does suggest that what we call reality is far more participatory, far more entangled with our own awareness than our everyday senses would have us believe. A dream is not something we sit back and watch. It is something we actively generate, moment by moment, with every flicker of attention and every act of imagination. If reality shares this quality, then our role in it is far greater than that of a passive observer. We are not just moving through a world that was handed to us, we are helping to bring it into focus. This shifts the weight of responsibility in a quiet but profound way. The tone of our attention matters, the quality of our presence matters. If every thought, every act of perception is part of the same generative process that gives a dream its shape, then what we choose to notice, to nurture, and to bring forward in ourselves may be inseparable from what the world becomes. And so the question lingers, not as an abstract puzzle, but as something deeply personal. If this is a dream, it is the one you are dreaming. What then do you choose to dream next? If this exploration stirred something in you, please give us a like. There are more questions to live, more edges of reality to walk together. And somewhere along the way, we may discover that the dreamer we've been searching for has been here all along. Now I'd like to hear from you. If this is all a dream, what's the most beautiful part so far? Share it below. Your perspective might be exactly what someone else needs to see. And if you want to keep exploring the edges of what's real, subscribe and stay with us. The dream is still unfolding.